Okay, good morning, and thank you very much, Gordon, for the kind introduction, and thank you for Brian and his team for the invitation to speak here at IRISSCON. A great privilege to be here and to speak at what I would think is the most influential of the Irish cybersecurity conferences. As I say, my name is Ciarán McMahon. I'm going to be talking not a whole lot about cybersecurity. I'm going to be talking mostly about my honeymoon. You're going to go home this evening and your partner's going to ask you, so what was the conference? What was the cybersecurity conference like? And you're going to say, well, this guy showed us photos of his honeymoon. So it's going to be a little bit different. And the reason why I'm taking this approach is, let me put it to you like this. All of you who work in cybersecurity, you understand that what you're doing is very important. But I think you also understand that there is a slight difficulty in explaining that importance to people who don't work in cybersecurity. And the reason for that fundamentally is that cybersecurity, information security, data protection is actually quite invisible. It's not tangible to the average person. So I've taken my lead in this presentation from a guy by the name of Bruce Hallis, who some of you will know. You can have a look at the Analogies project if you look for that online. And basically the idea is that you explain cybersecurity in relation to something else. So what I'm going to be talking about is a little event that happened to me happened to myself and my wife over the summer, and what I learned from that experience and how those learnings can be applied to cybersecurity and information security. So there's a couple of little lessons. There's a little bonus lesson in there along the way, which I hope some of you will find interesting and that you'll be able to take away from this, and it will help you explaining cybersecurity to the rest of your organization. So let me just set the scene. Myself and my wife got married last December. And we're still married. Thank you very much. We had our honeymoon in July. So if anyone's getting married, I'd recommend leaving some time after the wedding before you have the honeymoon. It's great because you have something else to look forward to. So we went to Greek island of Kos. Some of you might know where this is going. Lovely island in the Dodecanese. It's kind of close to Turkey. Temperature in July was around 29 to 32 degrees Celsius. Lovely weather, nice onshore breeze, great seafood. Wine was okay, but the portions and the measures of spirits, importantly, were very large. Because what happened about halfway through the honeymoon, at 1:30 on the 22nd of July, so myself and my wife had gone to bed about, say, 11 o'clock. So you're in pretty much deep sleep at 1:30. A 6.7 magnitude earthquake struck, about maybe 5 kilometers away from the hotel. It's a moment I'll never forget. We were both asleep, and I woke up. I was like, something's not quite right. And then it hit again. And if you can imagine, you're in bed, you're asleep. If you can imagine the Leinster pack on one side of the bed and the Munster pack on the other side of the bed, and they're going like this with the bed, and you're in it, and it's dark, and it's very, very loud. Extreme shaking, alarms going off. I grabbed hold of my wife. I held on to her for dear life, put my hand over her head. It probably was only about 10 seconds, but it felt like about 2.5 minutes. My wife thought it was a terrorist attack, but I thought it was, I knew it was something natural. It wasn't man-made, because the power of it, you could feel it was so deep under the ground. It was incredible. But the funny thing was, after it stopped, I sort of reached out and turned on the bedside lamp, and I was like, oh, we still have power. Okay, so it's not that bad. But the next thing I saw was, as I looked, there was a crack down by the side of the bed, and it was like running a knife through cheese or something. It was like the plaster was just crumbling. Plaster was coming out of the walls, and I was like, okay, I think we better get dressed and get out of here. So I turned to my wife and I said, okay, let's just grab the things that we need and get out of here. But I also, I don't know how, I had the presence of mind to say, put on something warm because we're going outside and we're going to be outside all night. There's no way we're getting back into this building. And that's precisely what happened, because as we came out in the corridor, you can see lumps of plaster falling all over the place. This was in the bottom of a 5-story building, and there was cracks just everywhere. Plaster all over the ground. And this was down outside, so you can see the concrete is just shearing because the sideways movement is smashing everything. And you can see on the outside, there's actually huge lumps of plaster falling off everything. The people who were in these rooms, they said they could see daylight through the wall. So it was pretty dramatic. We came down outside, and it was, as I'll explain, it was kind of organised chaos. Not very well organised. So the first cybersecurity lesson that I would have from this is have a survival plan. When an incident happens, you need to be able to go, okay, what exactly do I have prepared for us? What do I have prepared? Because the similarity between these things is we were locked out of the building for about 7 or 8 hours. And you can see this is outside on the front lawn of the hotel. As I say, this was an all-inclusive deal, so it was a package holiday. We were outside there. I had managed to... I brought the camera, which turned out to be quite a good idea for today's talk, because I own all of these photographs. I didn't have to look up image rights or anything. Brought our passports, phones, we had warm clothes. I did forget a couple of things, which I should have remembered. This is something that you will notice happening. The key thing I would notice about this is, or the key example I would compare this to, is the TalkTalk hack. Any of you remember when the TalkTalk hack occurred and you saw Dido Harding on the television like every hour on the hour? And she looked exhausted because they didn't seem to have a change of clothes for her in the office or any kind of a team rota that somebody else could go on. Big incidents like this, as some of you will know, a big cybersecurity hack like a breach, probably like what happened at Uber, it goes on for days and people are exhausted because they have to be constantly responding to phone calls and to clients and to media and so on. So you need to know, one expert told me, he said, the first thing I say when there's an incident, half of you go home and get some rest because we're going to need you in about 12 hours time. And that was what happened here. Myself and my wife like watching spy films, so we were kind of a little bit ready for this, and we sort of had the go bag mentality. So what do you actually need to have with you in the event of an incident? Is there something that you can have properly prepared so that when something happens you go, okay, well, all of the machines are completely borked, but we do have this laptop in a plastic bag that's never been used and we can start from that. We have like SIM cards that we can work off as well. So it's things like that that makes you it mightn't be hugely useful when the event actually happens, but it will make you feel more prepared and will have you in a sort of a disaster frame of mind. And these are just sort of obvious lessons. The other one is that they don't tell you about earthquakes, and it isn't always in the media about security incidents, is that there's going to be aftershocks. In Kos, we had 21 earthquakes of above 4 degrees of magnitude in the next week. Now, I didn't know about this, but that was actually quite severe. So when we're outside lying on the ground going, okay, well, we'll just wait until we're let back into the hotel, you're lying down trying to get a little bit of sleep and then it happens all over again. They were happening the whole way through the week. And the thing is, once you get over the initial shock, you're kind of fine. You're like, okay, well, there's an earthquake, so grand. But then a couple of days later, you're sitting down to dinner, and I think it was maybe the following Tuesday. So 4 days later, sitting down to dinner, and 3 aftershocks hit in the space of about 15 minutes. Now, Greek people are quite tanned, and like all of our, the waiters and waitresses, you could just see them. They all became Irish white within seconds because the blood just drained from their faces. They thought people were going to freak out and start running out of the place, and it was actually very stressful. In terms of cybersecurity, the thing you have to remember, and I think Brian mentioned this earlier on as well, these aren't one-off events. They're just certainly certain incidents get into the media, certain incidences have to be reported. But there's just, as all of you know who are at the coalface, is that there is a constant level of activity here that you're having to deal with. I think that's something that you need to actually communicate better to the rest of your organisations. I think as well, it's something that people in management need to know, that just because the event is over, something's been detected, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can relax. There's probably going to be more things happening. You think as well, look at the companies that were actually the biggest names. If you actually examine those cases, and it'd be nice if we had more detail on them, TalkTalk was actually properly hit several times. And the fact that a company can be easily hit once probably means that hackers will go, they look like an easy target and they're in trouble now, so let's go after them again. This is going to be a constant level of activity. It's not simply one-off. Now, the thing is, as I mentioned at the start about analogies, analogies are a very useful way of comparing one thing to another. So this is a fairly obvious one that I thought security engineers would enjoy. This is a little bonus lesson. It's called patching. So in the days, this was my side of the bed, and you can see there where the massive crack in the wall has been sort of patched over and painted over. And this happened like maybe 24 or 48 hours after the earthquake. And like obviously, the way I would put this is that obviously it's not the finished job, but it made everybody feel better that something was being done. And you kind of patching the thing together and like, okay, well, I know this building might not be structurally sound, but the fact that somebody is actually going around with a bit of polyfiller, so they're like, okay, well, they're doing something. The other little sort of, as we kind of stretch the analogy possibly a little bit too much, as people always say in incident response, they say things like, well, first you have to check your inventory of like what information is still secure and what's been leaked and so on. You would think in an earthquake when everybody runs out of the building, you kind of think, okay, well, the equivalent of an inventory would be a head count, and they'll take everybody's names before they let you back in. That didn't happen, which I was a little bit concerned about. There was other things about, you'd also say about controlling access to information so that nothing happens again. There was a certain amount of control of access. They said nobody go back into the building. But of course, one of the things I forgot in the go bag was sunblock, because it was in the middle of the night. But of course, we were out there all night until 7 o'clock in the morning, and then it starts to get quite bright. So the alarms were still going off. I did a little bit of a commando raid and went back in. Lots of people did. So there was no real access control over the building. So that's an example of the analogies sort of don't completely sit on each other. But one of the things which I find that is actually is not always mentioned when we're talking about information security, incident response, is the actual sort of human social psychology of what happens in a crisis or in a disaster. And this was very apparent during an earthquake. And I would simply say is that things went feral in ways which I was quite surprised about. So this is the photograph that I tweeted at the time, about 2 o'clock in the morning. The thing that I sort of noticed is the staff were quite good. They came out with water and sort of towels and things like that, so people were comfortable. But other things, if you're at a holiday resort, like sun loungers and things like that, they disappeared like in seconds. People were going and pulling them out of all over the places and dragging them around to the front of the hotel. The hotel management were reasonably good. They'd come out every once in a while and say, okay, there's been an earthquake and we're looking into it and we'll let you know more in a half an hour, which was kind of like, okay, well, that's fine. So that's your formal leadership structures. You'll find this in a crisis is that formal leadership roles will be quite tested. And you will find if somebody is a manager or a leader and if they actually have any strength of character at all. The other thing I noticed in this situation was that, of course, all of the all of the Irish people and the Brits sort of, oh God, this is terrible, isn't it? Oh Jesus, it's great crack, ha ha ha, and all that sort of thing. A very tall German man wandered around who had a rucksack and was explaining things in multiple different languages to lots of different people, telling everybody what was going on. So this is what I call informal leadership. You will find in certain, when your social structures are attacked by a crisis event, is that informal leadership will pop up. So you will find that some of your staff will actually show a bit of willing and will actually start doing things in a very useful way. But you may find that other people just simply walk off the park. So the thing that I would point out, as I said, if it doesn't look like somebody's in control, it'll be every man for himself very quickly. And I said this doesn't just mean your competitors. I mean, if it looks like your company is in trouble, other companies will try and swoop in and steal your business. Your supply chain as well might say, I don't think we can trust these guys. It looks like they're in trouble. They may start to move things very quickly. But the thing you really want to look out for is your co-workers. Are they going to actually walk off the park? Because here's a famous one. Recently, at the Equifax breach, it was noticed that certain executives had sold stock before the breach was made public. Now, they've recently been cleared by their board, but this looks very much like insider trading, that they used their knowledge of the breach, or that they may have had knowledge of the breach, and that they started dumping their stock. Their board has cleared them, but they're still under Justice Department investigation. So this is something which I think I would suspect as a psychologist, is that any crisis event, somebody is going to try and take advantage of it. And they may be people within your own organisation. So that is something that you have to keep an eye out for. The other thing, which is actually stressed an awful lot in incident response, is to have some sort of communication plan. What I would say here is, myself, when we came out of the earthquake, downstairs, had my phone with me, the first thing I did as a good Irish son is I texted my mother, who I would think would be the most important person to communicate with in this thing. Now, the thing I did remember to do as well is that I also texted my sister, who lives next door to my mother, because I figured Mum probably won't have her phone on, and she didn't. So if I hadn't texted my sister, who then rang my mother probably would have first heard about this on Morning Ireland, which is not something you really want to happen. Your mother turns on the radio in the morning and hears your son talking about surviving an earthquake. That was a mistake I think I kind of made because I tweeted about it, and then after that, the phone calls were coming in left, right and centre. By midday, I was exhausted, and I hit the bar fairly early that day, I tell you. But phone calls were coming in left, right and centre. Morning Ireland were very good, they were very nice, but of course, because, and this is the other thing that I think, thank you, I think you might not necessarily think about, is that if there's a big cybersecurity incident in a company and everything gets shut down, the plans always say, well, you have to communicate with, your regulators or the media and your shareholders and so on. Well, how do you communicate if everything's locked down? Because that's something I found very difficult, is actually to get a functioning phone line in the middle of an earthquake, because that was quite difficult. The thing is, I would say that there has to be a balance. We've mentioned, we had a great presentation earlier on about GDPR. We all know about mandatory breach notifications and all of that sort of thing is coming in. Who are the most important people that you have to contact in an incident? For me, it was my mother. I think, how much do you actually need to tell the media? I think there has to be a balance there, because in the very early stages, you might not actually know what's going on. So you might have to make certain cursory notifications. I think as well it's a good idea to have these things drafted well in advance, because they are going to happen. And the thing is as well, do you want your investors to find out about this in the newspaper? So it's a very balanced way of looking at how much information do you have that you necessarily do have to get out and who you have to get it to. But the final lesson I would have for everyone with regard to dealing with crisis incidents is that this is where you're really going to find out about your corporate culture, about the environment in which you're working with and the people you're dealing with. So, as I said, this was a package holiday. So we're dealing with the hotel staff, but we're also dealing with the travel representatives who are currently rebranding. And I've I'm not sure if that's part of it, but now the thing is, in the following days after the earthquake, the hotel staff, who are local Greeks, were absolutely phenomenal. One of our waiters said he had actually been in the bar where people actually died in Cos Central, and he had left 20 minutes before it happened, and he'd gone home, and so he was, seconds away from dying. And he said he went home, checked on his parents, and then he came into work. So he arrived into work after doing a full day of work, going out having a couple of beers, and he was back in the hotel at 3:00. So he had actually more or less worked a solid 24 hours in the place. The level of loyalty that the locals had to the hotel was phenomenal. They all listened, they all took care of us, they all put in huge amounts of effort. I showed you the photograph of the front drive of the hotel where everybody was basically camped out after the earthquake. There was bottles of water, there was sun loungers, there was blankets. That place was it was an absolute mess. It was all cleared up by 9:00 the following morning because of the pride with which these people looked at their place of work. Now, on the other hand, our travel representatives were not so hot. This was a notice that they put up in the hotel the following day, so that the Friday that it actually happened. I was like, following yesterday's earthquake, we had quite a few external and minor damages. Static condition, so it's basically, we had an earthquake, everything's fine, so enjoy your holiday. And in 2 languages as well, which I can tell you, people looked at this and went, is that it? That's all we're getting from the people that we've paid for this holiday? It's just, there's some structural damage, but it's fixed, and your rooms are fine. There was people who could literally see out the wall of their rooms. It was that badly damaged. So this sort of level of cursory communication with people did not go down well. This was the company which, and I don't mind mentioning the company's name because they admitted their fault because they actually refunded us 3 days of the holiday. So they figured out after a while. This was also a company which had people in the Caribbean during the last hurricane. So they had experience of dealing with disasters, but they didn't seem to be learning from it. So that did not go down well. I would say to you very clearly, it will test personal relationships. Some people will react during an incident, say, "Oh, computer's down, well, I'm going home. Early scoops." Or some people will go, you know what? And there was a really, it was earlier on this year during the NotPetya incident that didn't really affect the health service here. And I heard a story that I think it was in somewhere, some sort of like a primary care centre, that a nurse kind of like put a notice up on the door and wouldn't let people into the building. And it was a little bit misguided, but it was the fact that she was like, this is a big deal, we don't know what we can do here. She was not technically proficient, but she was like, no, you can't open the computers at all. And I was like, it shows her loyalty to her job. Completely misguided, but loyalty to the job. But which do you want in these situations? So as I say, this is something which, there's only so much of this that can be trained. An awful lot of this is going to reflect on personal relationships, thank you, and how people deal with each other and the respect that they have, how trusted they are by the company and how much they feel that they owe the company. So, to conclude, as I said, myself and my wife were there on our honeymoon, and as I communicated to my mother that we were safe and everything's fine, what I didn't actually tell her at the time, what she didn't know, was that my mother was on her way to becoming a grandmother. My wife was actually pregnant at the time. And so my wife is now 6 months pregnant. And that's why all of this affected me so personally, was that when we were sitting there, when we were lying there in the bed as the earthquake struck, my wife was actually carrying twins. So that's what I'm saying to you, is that these sort of incidences are very important. I think, really, if I was to leave you with one message, protect your data as carefully and as passionately as I protected my infant twins. Thank you very much.